Hello, good evening, and welcome back. So this is a video about context. We're basing it off this here from Sir Anthony Beevor, who warns that modern values shouldn't be used to judge historical figures like Sir Winston Churchill, as he is a Second World War historian with 8 million copies of books sold about the 20th century conflicts. But essentially, this whole thing is about context, and that goes not only for judging historical figures by their own context and all that, which isn't always necessary, and I think that entire perspective is slightly misplaced. It really is, because you don't really need to judge them by the values of the time. You don't. You really do not have to judge them by the values of the time. You simply have to say, okay, given the situation that exists at the time that they exist, using understanding of the culture at the time, how do you best persuade the most amount of people in order to fulfill the greatest good? It is almost a Machiavellian take from The Prince, essentially, that let us say that Winston Churchill, or whoever from centuries gone by, has enlightened values and agrees completely with the most enlightened person of the 21st century, whoever that might be, of whoever's perspective it might be. Okay, cool. But let's pick Churchill, why not? Seeing as that's the gentleman that's mentioned. And go, okay, cool. So, given today's moral standing, right, he's been inculcated in today's ways, or you have, and now you're sent back to his situation, his position. What would you do differently given what the culture is? As in, how people are thinking at the moment, how much support would you have if you went straight in with these modern values compared to trying to use the slippery slope argument in order to slowly get them on side? And sure, that might mean that you're responsible for some atrocities or some less than ideal situations in order to get to the point you're trying to get to, but nonetheless, at least a step in the right direction is better than being too radical and therefore not having any support, and therefore the status quo continues. So you do not have to view them by the context of their own time. You really don't. It is simply understanding the situation that these people find themselves in, and therefore the best move in order to push the progressive values, as they say, is most likely very close to what they suggested to do in order to garner most support, and that is actually what will get you to the progressive values the quickest. And it's as simple as that. And I do understand that a lot of people won't like hearing that you actually have to compromise a little bit in order to sway a majority of people, because you don't have time to go through the minutiae of points. But nonetheless, that is how democracy works, and therefore that is actually the process which has to be done. And I'm sure you've had that in your own personal life as well, especially if you're trying to convert Muslims, for example. That is the go-to example, as David Wood mentions quite a lot, that you won't be able to do it on your first encounter. Of course not. But instead you would just sow the seeds of doubt, whether that be, if we're picking Islam, whether Muhammad was a true prophet, or about his keeping of slaves, or about multiple wives, or about rape, or whatever it might be, or about the preservation of the Quran. Any of these things that you can just sow that little seed of doubt into their head the first time. And then when they come back, of course, they got questions, and you just throw a little bit more at them each time. That some people would say, yes, well, of course, it would be best to say, oh, the Quran is utter shit, and Muhammad was a false prophet, and you should disregard everything written there. And yeah, you would be correct. But that isn't going to persuade people out of it, and that isn't going to change people's minds. In which case you have to be a lot more gentle about it in order to slowly but surely change their mind. And the same goes here. So by all means, say that these people did badly based on today's standards, but understand the situation they found themselves in. You do not have to judge them by the context to which they were in. Of course not, no. You do not have to judge them by the standards that existed at the time, because there's more to it if you actually understand the situation. So yes, context is what matters, not necessarily judging them on the values of that time period. No, of course not, because that time period could have really wrong values. So that isn't saying that somebody is moral or principled. It is simply saying that they understand how to get power, which is not something that personally I respect. But if somebody is enacting change for the betterment of all of us, then that is something I respect. So, as small the difference as there might be, it is incredibly worthwhile and notable, and I think it's worth making that slight subtle shift in mindset in order to understand that. Of course, when it comes down to encouraging the status quo, like the Islamic slave trade, for example, which has been far more prosperous and prolific than the Atlantic slave trade, then, yeah, do mention the fact that the reason there isn't a black population in the Middle East is because they castrate black men because they view them the same as dogs, instead of in the West, of course, where we do have a bigger black population because we did not castrate black males. Then yeah, do draw that distinction if you wish to try and say, oh, these people of this country, this culture is doing things immorally. Then yeah, and pick out the ones that are doing that despite Enlightenment values and knowledge, knowing that there is a better way to go about these things. So yeah, pick the ones that know that there are other examples to look at of success, and yet are disregarding that in order to continue to enact evil and torture. Then yeah, by all means, use your modern values there against them, seeing as there are actual real-world contemporary examples for them to study and isolate and then enact within their own cultures. Then yeah, pick them. But when it comes back to trying to suggest that somebody even as popular as Winston Churchill could have just made the massive jump of 70 years down the line and go, cool, yep, now we're just going to make these radical changes and I'm going to expect your support despite being a conservative. Well, of course that isn't going to happen, in which case you would have gone back a bit because you would have gone back to Labour. So, with Baldwin, best of luck with old Stan there. So that is the key takeaway in order to understand that, yeah, sure, everybody makes mistakes. And you got to understand that people are like that. But if their net effect is a positive and it pushes people in the right direction, and it is actually an effective way to get there, then understand that there are costs associated with benefits as well. And I'm going to leave it there. I really am. But let me know what you guys think down below. Is it fair to judge people based on today's standards, given that everybody should be striving to perfection, even if they're not aware of it at the time being? Everybody can always do better, and therefore they shouldn't rest until they have found the best way to do things. Or do you think, no, standards are always changing, in which case we can't judge them on today's standards? Or do you actually agree and say, yeah, given that we agree that this is a good way to go, as in how we have come so far over so many decades and centuries, that if somebody put in the piece in order to get us closer to where we are now, then they should be respected for that, because they did their part in swaying public opinion to get to a better place. Either way, let me know down below. Always intrigued to hear what you have to say. And of course, as always, until next time, have a good one.